This is Nitya Caleb, and you're listening to Food in Canada, the podcast. Hello, everyone. I'm Nitya, your host and the editor of Food in Canada. Today on the podcast, we have Zoey Shamai, founder of Tonica Kombucha, which turned 20 this year.
Yay!
Congratulations, Zoey, and thanks for joining us today.
Thank you so much, Nitya. It's a pleasure to be here.
You're welcome. So, your company turned 20 this year. Now, did you imagine that the tea you brewed and shared with friends would one day become such a successful beverage brand?
Absolutely not. I had hoped, of course, that my friends and community would love the kombucha I was brewing, but I had no intention when I began to ever have a business, and certainly not a business this size. So it's quite a beautiful moment to see it all come to fruition. And of course, along the way, it's always nonstop. But it's so beautiful to be here now and have such a great community of support for what we do, and also know that we're bringing this incredible ancient tonic to so many Canadians.
So, take us back to the initial days. You were a yoga practitioner and then you came across kombucha. So, what motivated you to recreate the beverage? And maybe, we could just pause for a second over here and explain kombucha a little bit. I mean, most
Sure.
of our readers are food and beverage processors, so I assume they know, but it's always helpful to have a definition to start with.
Absolutely. So kombucha is a fermented tea, and it's fermented with the kombucha culture. And that culture, you could think of it similar to a sourdough culture or
Hmm.
a culture you would put into yogurt. So the kombucha culture is tons of minute, minuscule little bacteria and yeast, and they form a zooglial mat. And what happens is, as the culture is put into a sweetened, caffeinated tea, it will metabolize all the sugar and all the tea out of it, of the caffeine. And the byproduct are all of these living enzymes that we love for digestion, and a lot of really, really helpful acids and bacteria that are really good for the liver. They're quite good then for the skin and the hair and overall immune system. So what happens is we set up the fermentation, and it will take about 30 to 60 days for the culture to fully ferment the tea. And you know that it's right, the pH drops to a certain level, but just even by smelling it and tasting it, there's an incredible like tart sharpness that comes out of it, and it will give off a little bubble here and there. And that is how traditionally kombucha has been made. Actually, it's said to have been made since 2021 BC
Hmm.
or 221 BC up until
Yeah,
now, 2026. So,
that's,
yeah, it's lasted the test of time
yeah.
and continues to grow. And for many centuries, it was a home craft. It was said to be passed down through first through the Qin dynasty in China, and then across Europe, and then eventually to the counterculture of the hippies in North America in the 60s. But it was only, into the 90s, 2000, really 2000s, that it started to become a commercial product. And mine was the first kombucha in Canada back in 2006.
That's great. So, what motivated you to recreate that beverage?
Well, to be honest, I loved the effect that it had on my digestion. I was very healthy back then. I was studying in a yoga ashram, so everything was vegetarian and there was no intoxicants or wine or anything. So I felt I was pretty healthy. But when I drank my first glass of kombucha,
Hmm.
the next day, the elimination I had was amazing. And I felt so light and clear. And I was like, okay, I got to have more of this. And I just continued, and it continued. And to this day, I'm always having my shots before a big meal or having a whole one after a meal. And what motivated me really was I loved it. So I was making it for myself. But when I moved back to Toronto that same year, there was no kombucha on the market. I couldn't buy it anywhere. When I started it, there was already one brand who was still an incredible brand down from the States, GT Synergy. But in Canada, there was no kombucha. So I
Hmm.
started to bottle it, and I got it into the restaurant where I was waitressing, and then eventually to stores. And so the motivation was sort of a selfish thing. Like I was addicted to it, I loved it, and then
So let's make everybody else addicted to it.
exactly. And everyone loved it. They that's how it started. They would come back to the restaurant and ask for bigger bottles. Could I sell it to
Hmm.
them in liter bottles? And so it really, really grew organically. And sort of the dream formed with each day. So I would go to some stores and they would say, "Oh, we loved your product. You know, you should really make a website." And I was like, "A website? Oh, I don't need a website." And they
But
said, "Yeah, but it's a good idea." And so, "Oh, okay, okay." And so I just sort of as I went, would take advice from all of these people in the industry. And it really helped in the early days me to sort of cement the foundation of what is Tonica today.
that's great. But Zoe, let's, before we talk about the website, I assume you don't have any food science background or any connections to the F&B manufacturing space. So, yeah,
Well, I
you
do
do.
have
Okay.
a very close connection, which is that my mother was a food entrepreneur. And so
Okay.
she actually created the first CPG hemp company in Canada, 1999 Roots Hemp Food, and they made hemp everything.
Okay.
And then chia. So it's true, I did not have a food and science background, but I
Hmm.
grew up around nonstop food experiments. I grew up very healthy, often macrobiotic diet, vegetarian diet, then some meat, but everything was always with consciousness and awareness of where the food was from and what it was good
Hmm.
for. So I'll just, that's the only snippet I wanted to say. But it's true, I did not study food, did not study science.
There must have been a big learning curve then when you decided that you want to make this product, you want to commercialize it as well. So, what were the
Absolutely.
first signs that this beverage that you made, shared with your friends and family, could actually be commercialized and sold?
Well, I think when I started to get demand from people to order more and produce more, I realized, yeah, that like I said, like that it's not just me that's going to be addicted to this taste because it serves something in the palate that no other
Right.
foods taste. And so it was very gradual. I was quite fortunate in that it took a long time for the kombucha industry to really hit and grow. And so in that time, I had a lot of trial and error to perfect what I was doing and make it more marketable. And I did realize, marketing is really important. So when I showed people the actual kombucha and the SCOBY, often they were a little bit scared and didn't want to go near the
It doesn't
globby
look very
gelatinous.
pleasing, Zoe.
You've seen it, Nitya?
The culture, it's not
Yeah.
very pleasing to the eye, let's be honest.
It's not. It's not. It's a little scary. You're like, what is
Yeah.
going on in there? However, once it's filtered and packaged, I realized, this is something that I think I should market more to the mass population than the health food niche people because they were aware of kombucha already. And my goal was to make it so light and flavorful that anyone could enjoy it, but they would also get those benefits of real
Yeah.
authentic kombucha. So
Yeah.
we did go to a very early days. I had my own brand. A friend made a caricature of me. It was called the Fairies Tonic. But then right before I went in Dragon's Den, and I think we were at 2010, rebranded to Tonica. And so
Hmm.
that was really to have a brand that more people could relate to as a tonic and
Hmm.
the branding as it still is today, although we've done, several rebrands since then, but it's very fruit forward. So it's easy for people to recognize and feel comfortable with.
Yeah. It's as I was mentioning to you before we started recording, Zoe, Tonica is a nice entryway into kombucha if you've not
Yes.
had kombucha before. It's it doesn't have that tarty sour flavor that is usually associated with a fermented drink. So it's a
Yes.
it's a nice entryway.
Thank you. Thank you, Nietzsche. Yes, we do our best to keep that, that smoothness in there.
Yeah.
And people will more experience the benefits from it versus going drinking and going, "Ooh, this is really like an intense vinegar type drink."
Absolutely, yes. So going back to the early days, now when you were evolving from a do-it-yourself brew to a real brand, what were the first two, three decisions that made it real for you? And how difficult were these processes?
Well, I think the first one was to get a commercial facility. So to move out of my, bachelor apartment where I was fermenting all of the kombuchas and move into a facility. And that was difficult because up until then, I basically had a model where every case I sold, I would put that back into the company and buy more tea and buy more sugar and buy more glass.
Mhm.
But with getting the commercial lease, it was the first place where I really had to have a little bit more startup funds.
Yeah.
And so I was very lucky in that a family member introduced me to the bank and co-signed a line of credit at that time, which
Mhm.
they gave me, and that allowed me to get into the facility and set it up properly. So I would say that was the first one. At that point, obviously, I was taking it quite seriously. The next step was how was I going to expand? By now, I had gone beyond delivering on my bicycle store by store, and we had a couple of small local distributors who they
Mhm.
actually came to me. I mean, the whole story is a little bit unorthodox because they said, "Hey, we're seeing kombucha, like Fairy's Tonic, your product everywhere. We'd like to carry it for you, and we can bring you to X amount more stores." So I said, "Yes, great." But then in thinking about how can I move it even further, there was that rebrand, like I just mentioned,
Yeah.
going to Tonica. And then going on the Dragon's Den. That was a really big decision. A lot of people at that time, Dragon's Den was fairly new, and a lot of people were saying, "You have to go on, you have to go on." And I didn't, I was quite caught up in the day to day of fermenting and bottling and delivering and making sales calls. I didn't really see that it would be super advantageous to me, but I think probably after the fifth person mentioned it, I thought, okay, I'm going to look into this. So I started to watch the show and decided I'm going to do it. So that was a great, huge moment for Tonica because even though I didn't accept the deals off the air, on the air, it was a very successful show. I was able to communicate to all the viewers across Canada, what kombucha was and why it was so good for their digestion, why they would want to
Mhm.
drink this.
Yeah. And
Um,
this was in 2010, right, Zoe? The
the the
Dragon's Den
show
episode?
aired in the show aired, I believe, in 2012,
Okay.
and then there was a follow-up success show that happened, I think, in 2016, where they said, well, even though she didn't take the deal, let's look where she is now. And they came to my new facility and filmed me
Nice.
teaching a yoga class in the park, which I don't really do anymore, but I did it for the show.
Okay.
um,
A-
yeah.
And where was your first facility, Zoe?
The very first one was right near where I live now in the Junction in Toronto. Is at Bloor and Symington and
Okay.
Symington Lofts. And there was a friend of mine who had New Moon cookies, Eden. So she had a cookie factory there. So I knew about
Okay.
the space and I visited her to get advice one day. And then I thought, maybe this is where I'm going to go next.
That's great. So, one thing about kombucha is that it's alive, right? So, which really
Yes.
makes it very a tricky ingredient to work with. So, what are some of the non-negotiables in your brewing process that helps protect taste and consistency?
Some of the initial part that is very, very important is how the culture is treated. So obviously, we have a very clean facility, and now I have a whole QC team. It's very different than when I started, but even then, I was always extremely clean and careful with the culture and the environment, as well as it is a living culture. And a lot of us have seen all those incredible tests that came out decades ago about how water molecules react to the energy around them. So we do have in our micro lab, we have beautiful music playing and colorful images of waterfalls on the doors and the walls. And so we do try to keep the energy very nice. Other than that, we don't mess around with that traditional recipe that always works so well. So we've come up with a proprietary way to always continue that very strong culture. There was a point, it's a whole other story, at some point in my growing of the company that where we got into a really bad facility and it almost destroyed all my cultures. And so that threw me into basically becoming a scientist and figuring out how do we move from the home brewing to
Yeah.
scaling up in a
Yeah.
very short periods of time, because at that
Yeah.
point a lot of my cultures had been destroyed.
Hmm.
So there is a lot that went into it. And today it's quite different. There are a lot of kombuchas on the market, even the ones that taste quite strong. They actually often add acetic acid or probiotics that they list on the label. However, because those are not naturally occurring, if they're additionally adding those, they will often
Hmm.
die in packaging before it gets to the customers. It is a very sensitive living being, the kombucha. And so, we don't add anything into that initial ferment.
Culture.
And
Hmm.
we actually this year we're giving back. I've launched a DIY kombucha kit. So many will be able to do it at home. And it's in those instructions, which is very clear. Like, you don't want to add real fruit during the fermentation process, because really that is going to slow down the fermentation and the actual ingredients that the culture needs to continue to grow.
Oh, that's right. So tell me more about when you were scaling up. How did you manage to keep the recipe intact, or make tweaks without really compromising on what are the health benefits that kombucha offers or the taste profile as well?
Yeah. So right from the beginning, I always fermented. You can see behind me, this is a 1 gallon jar. And basically from the beginning, that's what I learned to ferment in. So I just kept that going and then eventually scaled up in our micro lab to 2.5 gallons and
Hmm.
sometimes 5 gallons. But we keep that traditional recipe exactly the way it's always been. And over the years, we have tweaked it. As you noticed, we have our low sugar cans, which use different ingredients than straight sugar. They have stevia and erythritol. Of course, I tried my best. I'm not a big stevia fan, to make sure there's none of that stevia aftertaste, but that there have been tweaks along the ways the market demands. I think one of the reasons why, I we pioneered kombucha in Canada back in 2006, and why we're still one of the top national brands today across Canada is because we have been able to pivot and to really innovate even prior to the trends coming out or with the trends. So at this point, we're all Tonica produces all kombucha. However, the kombucha flavors, the formats, the sugar levels, those ingredients, all of that has shifted a lot. And we're actually by the end of this year, we're doing something very exciting, which is for the first time ever, we will be launching different products outside of kombucha.
Oh, really?
Yes. Yes.
Uh-huh.
Once they're the kind of products that are very much in line with the Tonica brand. So
Okay.
they're authentic, they're healthy, they're delicious, and they'll just allow, the regular consumer who's not necessarily going out of their way to down a lot of supplements. It will allow them to bring even more health into their life through our product.
Okay, I'm looking forward to more details, Zoe. I know more they will be coming down the line, so
Yes.
I'm excited for that and for you as well.
Thank
Now, you
you.
spoke about innovation and you spoke about how most of the innovation lies in product formats and flavors. So, can you talk a little bit more about that?
We actually, because we're celebrating our 20th year in business, we just posted a whole bunch on our Instagram with different years and pictures of flavors and different things we've done. So this year I might not get it right, but I think
It's
it was
okay.
about okay, I think probably around 2014 or something like that, we launched our super tonic line. So for me,
Hmm.
the idea has always been, number one thing is that we have authentic kombucha. It's going to serve digestion and make happy bellies all over. But on top of that, what else can we do? So we brought in goji berries, which traditionally, they come from Asia and very good to help with several things, vitamin C, but also lucid dreaming. And there's many benefits in different ways that goji berries are associated with. So that was a fun
Hmm.
one. Then we also brought in turmeric, which of course has been an incredible tonic in and of itself, used in many cultures
Yep.
also, all throughout Asia and now more here. And so the turmeric one we did with a lime, because I thought that was a good thing. And I had, while I was in India, had many dishes that had turmeric and lime as well. So I liked
Yeah.
that. And then we did one that has lasted now into our current line, which is blue green spirulina.
Hmm.
So it's from the lake. The algae is really, really high in antioxidants, very alkalizing, has a lot of minerals. So today we have that in our lemonade twist, which is tastes like lemonade, but the twist is that it's blue and it has these great, great benefits. But that would be one where, I wanted to incorporate things were on the rise with superfoods and trends. So bring
Yes.
some
Yeah.
of that in.
So which one is your favorite?
My favorite is actually the grapefruit glow.
Uh-huh. Why?
I love grapefruits. They're like my favorite little snack. Eat them for dessert, and I love the flavor profile we came up with for it.
Lovely. And I imagine Tonica kombucha is offered in a can format and a bottle format,
That's
correct?
correct. Yes,
Okay.
yes. So depending on the retailer, we
Hmm.
do list everywhere from our partners at Metro and Loblaws, Farm Boy, Sobeys, Healthy Planet, and 2,500 stores across Canada, and they all carry different formats. For instance, I think Whole Foods carries all of the formats. Some of them will specialize and just have some depending on their cooler space.
Different.
Um,
Absolutely.
but we have our grab and go, the 370 ml size, and then we also have our cans, and then we have
Hmm.
our liter bottles. We also
Hmm.
do kegs, and kegs
Okay.
are we do sell some on our online shop, but generally they're more for offices and cafes, and those go through our food service distributors who bring those out so that people can have that option of something in the day or to replace a beer at night. Um, and then we also do 1,000-liter totes, which we've partnered in the past with cannabis companies or beer companies. Like Mill Street made a Radler at one point. So yeah, we've done a lot of different formats and things.
That's great. I assume you do private label as well, Zoe, or no?
Yes, we do. Yes,
Okay.
yes, we do. I think it's okay to mention, but yeah, we do the private label for our partners at Metro as well as for Farm Boy.
Okay. That's great.
We also do a few smaller ones, but I don't know if I have the release to talk about those.
That's fine completely.
Yeah,
So, in your 20 years in the industry, what lessons have you learned that you like to share with founders now?
many. There have been
I
many,
know
many
the list must be
lessons.
really long. It's not easy to crack into the CPG space in Canada. So,
Yeah. Well, I think the first lesson is at the beginning, I think especially as women, I do feel that there's this daunting feeling that we're never doing enough, and
yeah,
that we're never going to be able to compare with what we see all around us. And the biggest thing I've learned is that you really have to focus only on what you're doing and bring all your energy to do the best you can at what you're making because it's so easy to compare. And especially today, like we didn't have social media when I was growing up. So I could only imagine the pressures of looking everywhere. And it happens, I see it a lot on LinkedIn as well. I actually don't spend a lot of time on any of the social platforms. So sometimes my team is telling me I need to do more, but I find it very distracting. And I find a lot of it is smoke and mirrors. I see all these posts by companies talking about how much they make and this and that. And then you find out they're in deep debt, or they end up going bankrupt. And so the point is that people can say many things and it really appears that way, especially at the beginning. And I think it's so important to just keep your focus on what you're doing. And
yeah,
if you love doing it, and if you're getting a good response, like there's a demand for it, then keep going. And I do strongly feel whatever you want to call it, energy, the universe, God, but you will get the feedback to let you know whether or not this is a flow. And if it's flowing, keep going with it. So that's one thing that's sort of definitely comes from my yoga and meditation practice and background, which is that it's very challenging. It's very, very challenging to be an entrepreneur, you know,
yes, especially in the
you,
food space.
especially in the food space. Yeah.
Yeah.
And you take everything home with you and you're responsible for everything and you have to wear all the hats. So you really need a practice outside of the external validation or the external cues. You really need an internal one every day to reset yourself to focus. So I think that's very key. And other than that, I would say one of the great things I've learned over the years when I started, a lot of the staff that I hired, there was no background in kombucha. I mean, nobody, one of the reasons why I started to manufacture it myself and figure out how to scale it up is because at that time, no one would touch kombucha. The factories that had the equipment that I would want were like beer factories, and everyone was very worried about the bacterial cross contamination. That was one thing. And now we do carbonate in large forced carbonation tanks. At that time, we didn't. But anyway, just to say the staff and the incredible team that I brought on, they didn't necessarily have any experience with kombucha. And the first staff I brought on to help me were I taught them how to brew and then
Mm.
set up packaging more than just manually putting it on. I got little machines and hired people to help with that. The point of that is all to say that I think it's a lesson that I've learned and continues to be true to this day, which is that it's the energy of the people. So you really want to hire and work with people that you trust and you enjoy working with. And I think I've seen it, myself too. Sometimes like had a staff for almost 10 years, but there's a shift in their lifestyle, there's a shift in their abilities or even care to about the company. And so when
Mm.
things start to shift and energy starts to shift, you really have to pay attention because if you're not working with people who are bringing positivity and working through the challenges when they arise, challenges of course always arise, but
Oh,
one of
yes.
you can't avoid it, right? Like
No,
no,
never.
there's not a chance and you're not going to have a company because you can't be an island. But if it's not constructive and you feel like people are no longer working with the team well, you really have to, do what they say is, hire slow and fire fast. So when
Yeah.
somebody's not working out, no matter how sort of indentured they've become in the foundation of the company, you need to make changes. And when you make those changes, wow, it's like the whole team is lighter, everyone's happy. And so for me, that's always been key is hire people that I see are eager, that want to work, that bring a positivity. And even if they don't have the credentials of some of the other candidates, but if they have that positivity and a can-do attitude and a want to learn, anything is possible. Now, of course, for our accounting and QA, like there's certain departments where it is
Yeah.
important that that background is there, but it's the same with those. There's so many candidates that come to us that want to work with Tonica. And at the end of the day, it has to be a fit for the whole team. It's not just me who makes
Absolutely.
that decision.
Absolutely. So, in your 20-year journey, Zoe, you've leaned heavily on your people, on your staff and employees. Who are the other people that you've learned on? Has there been any groups that have helped you? Any mentors you would like to mention?
Absolutely. Yes. I think throughout my years, like I was saying, even from the early days, I would ask a lot of advice and I would
Mm.
go to people that I saw in the industry or outside of the industry who were doing well. So those began with friends, of course, because I could
Yeah.
access them, family members, friends. But over the years, it became other people in the industry, people who I would perhaps work with or meet through other contacts, and they would often say, hey, hit me up if you ever have any questions. And I was like, thank you, and I
I have a
did.
1,001 question.
Exactly. And so a couple of those were incredible because I would go to them for advice and they shared so much of their time to this day. And I would say, in particular, Peter Matson and Matt Lurie have stood out as two, industry advisors that have really, really just given their time as because as Peter's always said, you actually take the advice that I give you. It's different than a lot of my teams. And I say, of course I'm going to, you've been so successful. And so I think beyond those two, there have been so many. Of course,
Yeah.
I've gone to my mother a lot, who was an incredible entrepreneur. When she was alive, I would go every Friday night for Shabbat dinner at my grandmother's, and she was also a businesswoman. And so she was very different than my mother, who's like this wild entrepreneur. She's very practical. And so I would go to her a lot for like practical business advice.
Mm.
And then just, my best friends, my girlfriends have been so incredible for all the emotional support over the years. And my loving partner, he is incredible. And so he's such a huge support. And you really do need that because being an entrepreneur and having a business grow this large, it takes a lot. And so I try not to take it home at the end of the day, but sometimes, there is a conversation where I need to clear some stuff out and remove it so I can enjoy a nice dinner in the evening. And so all of that emotional support and practical support has been really key. So I would also say I would encourage anyone, whether entrepreneur or not, but to reach out those people that you feel a connection with and ask if, they can give you feedback. A lot of people do reach out to me and they ask, could I take you out for a coffee or this and that? And I do try to help. My schedule is fairly full. So I always say, I'd love to help if you can send me specific questions
Yeah.
because then, they can focus a little bit on exactly. And that's the same for my mentors. I don't really call them and just kind of, oh, but I try to really narrow it down and I find also just in general with building the business, that helps that visioning, that specific attention of energy to like, what is the thing I want to work on? Suddenly, if I put my focus there, I get all the support for that. Something will just pop up, or I'll get a random email, or I'll walk by a store and say, oh, that's a great idea. And so, in the same way with community and growing a company, I think it's really helpful if you can kind of focus on what you'd like help with and then specifically reach out to people with that question. You're probably much more likely to get great responses.
I agree with you on that front, Zoe. I have to ask you, what's your proudest behind the scenes win that customers will never see?
Oh, that is a great question. Well, we have a lot of them, I have to
Back in
say,
the
but
20 years, gotta be. There's gotta be a lot.
One of one of them was when we moved to our fully automated bottling line. So that was about 8 years ago, and we went from all manual filler, manual labeler, everything, and moved into this beautiful facility we're in now with a fully automated line. And so when we started to run that, wow, it was incredible. I actually threw a party and had all my family and friends there to see it in action because it just, I mean, it reduced our time exponentially and made
Mhm.
everything so much more efficient. So that was an internal one. I think another big one just happened recently in the last 6 months. We've been working for years on two accounts. One of them is a very large account out in BC, Save On Foods, and it's the
Yes.
Pattison Group, which is connected to Nesters, Quality Foods, and anyhow, we got that listing. So that was
Ah,
just phenomenal. And we're still in the first year of trial, and I've seen through many that it does change over the years. But that was a huge new win. And then another big one here on Ontario and Quebec is that we've also been working on this one for about 6 years. But we just got listings in No Frills and Maxi stores. So that's been
lovely.
incredible for us. And you know, it's always expanding and so like I don't want to just signal out those partners because I remember like when Metro first called me, that was one of my first like massive retail stores that reached out, and he reached out to us, Danny Bucci. I was so thrilled about that call. I think it was after the Dragon's Den, so there was a little bit more
Mhm.
traction going on, but just, or when we launched the Farm Boy private label, and just all of these are just wins where you put so much energy into it and you hope for the best, but you know that there's many brands and many people with much bigger pockets than I had for many years in the beverage industry. I still don't have partners or any external investment other than, when the banks help from time to time. But when you get these big wins and it puts you up there with like your mentor, like GT's, the one I said to the first
Yeah.
kombucha, and we're right there alongside and our sales are up there with them. It feels amazing because it's all the hard work of all our
Oh,
staff, our
yes.
brewers, our sellers, our bottlers, our pack, like everything. So it's beautiful.
That's amazing. Zoe, in terms of volume, how much do you sell?
So we do about 1,000 cases a day. And
Okay.
those cases go out, whether cans or glass. And so, yeah, and then we'll add to that our
The food
kegs and
service.
our 1,000 liters. So yeah, we do quite a bit and we're very happy about it.
That's wonderful, Zoe. So if you had to go back and redo one decision, what would that be?
To redo one decision.
Yes, something. There's always, you always regret something, right? You don't
Yeah,
want to, but
yeah.
it's it happens.
I mean, the biggest regret and kind of trial that we went through was just after the Dragon's Den. I moved us into a facility
Hmm.
in the stockyards again in Toronto, and it was before the stockyards had been built up in the commercial center. So it was like the first kind of developer landlords that wanted to do that, and I knew I needed a bigger facility, and the price was great, and it ended up being a complete disaster. My regret was not doing my due diligence. I did not research the landlords. I just took their word that they were converting this facility that had been dormant for like 10 years and that they had upgraded everything, and so the pipes were good and it was a food grade facility. And yeah, within the first week of moving in, we discovered there was lead in the pipes and it destroyed almost all of my cultures.
I can,
And
yeah.
it took about 9 months for me to recover from that and get into a new facility. So I think the biggest regret would have been not doing my investigation beforehand. If it was a pre-existing facility with lots of food manufacturers, that would have been different. But this was almost like too good to be true. And at that time, I didn't really use credit. So I dumped a huge chunk of cash into doing all of the epoxy floors and getting everything, and then that was just gone.
It was our lost money.
That was a
Wow,
huge
Zoe,
setback. Yeah,
that's a huge, huge lesson you learned
it
quite
was.
early.
It was. But
Yeah.
the beautiful thing coming out of that was that I became a scientist and really, really figured out how to bring back this culture, which I had had several years to build up organically to do big volumes.
Hmm.
Now it was gone. And every time we tried to get to a certain point, it would fail. And
Yeah.
I didn't want to bring in a concentrate or inject the probiotics like I saw other people at that time. So I was set on, I'm sure there's a way to continue our authentic brews and get this back. And so it did take about 9 months, but now we have that proprietary blend, and it's like, I guess it would be worth it, but it was also my bad for not researching before I moved into that facility.
Thanks, Zoe, for sharing that. It's not often that I hear founders talking about their failures. So
Oh,
thank
really?
you for sharing that. Yes, absolutely.
Oh my gosh. I mean, yes, Nietzsche, there's so many failures, right? It's like failing to perfection, and we just get
Yeah,
better and better, hopefully learn from our mistakes. Otherwise, we don't get very far, I don't think.
I guess I understand. Perfection is a myth. You just need to keep failing. I mean, how else will you learn and how else will you keep pushing the envelope?
Absolutely.
Yeah. So I have a question for you, Zoe. You've been in this
Yes.
business for 20 years now. So what's one of the most surprising thing that you would have learned about the Canadian beverage consumer?
Wow. I don't know. You know what? I would be surprised. What happened was really interesting. Right around 2013, 2014, there was this huge market shift towards functional beverages. And that's
Yeah,
when kombucha started to really fly. So I guess that would be something I wasn't really expecting. Of course, I was working nonstop to promote Tonica and let everyone know how good kombucha was, but there was like this big massive market shift, and I it came before COVID, and I think it was this no, baby boomers getting to this like crucial point in their lives and really having that time and awareness to realize how important food was to
in
health
real
and
life.
longevity. And
Yeah,
so getting away from sort of the Western standard of treating illness after the fact to more of the Eastern standard of
yeah.
really integrating healthy foods and herbs into our daily diet. Um, I think something was going on then, and it was boom, this big shift, and all of a sudden, I was lucky that I was on Dragon's Den around that time, so it did push it out, but it wasn't me. It was like there was this whole market shift to wanting to have more functional foods, and at that time really was beverage and kombucha. And we've seen it continue. And of course, it got
Yeah.
another huge spotlight and push around coming out of COVID, through COVID.
Yeah.
How do we
Yeah.
keep our immunity up? And I think actually the surprise is more for manufacturers and these large companies that try to greenwash their products, which really aren't authentic, whether it's kombucha or organic or coming from supplements for vegetarians that maybe aren't actually going to bring them those results. So I think the surprise to me is how many manufacturers there are out there capitalizing on markets that are out there to do good, and like
Hmm.
everything else in the capitalistic system, have taken it and now are putting a lot of things out there that consumers really are they're not going to help consumers. So I guess that's not really your question, but my surprise
No,
has
no, it's
been
fine.
that. And I think the Canadian consumer is intelligent and does check labels. So I've seen a lot of those brands come and go over the years, a lot of, new functional beverages or this or that. And at the end of the day, if like we are consumers as well, if we don't feel the effects of those products, we're not repeat buyers. So yeah, I think manufacturers should be more transparent about what they're doing, because eventually everyone knows and it doesn't work out for them.
Yes, and consumers want authenticity. They want products that are tasty while helping them live longer lives. That's the baseline right
Absolutely.
now from Canadian consumers. That's what we manufacturers need to meet.
Yes,
Yeah,
100%.
absolutely. So before I ask you about your future plans for Tonica, you've already shared a little bit about that.
Yeah.
Quick question about if is there a myth about kombucha that you've come across in Canada that you'd like to dispel?
I've come across myths about making kombucha. Well, first of all, I would say not all kombuchas need to be very, strong vinegar tasting. That does not appeal to everyone, and certainly Tonica isn't like that. So if you've tried one before and sworn off it, please go try a Tonica. That's
Okay,
a that's a little sales plug. Thank you, Nietzsche. But
okay,
no,
fair
I would
enough.
say one of the biggest myths is that kombucha is dangerous to ferment at home. I remember this from the early days, and the truth is, it's very, like in small volumes, it's a very simple thing to do, which again, we're releasing our do-it-yourself homebrew kombucha kit for everyone to try. The kombucha, while it ferments, if there's a problem and the pH can't drop, you will very quickly see mold form on the SCOBY. It'll be white or red or green, and that's an immediate like throw out. You must have touched that with a contaminated spoon, or there's something weird in the air. But generally, if people are curious but scared of making kombucha at home, I would say don't be scared. It's
Okay,
it's so simple, and what happens is when the fermentation is set up right, and it's literally like 5 steps and it's done, the pH will drop, and it drops to 2.8 or below. So it's extremely safe to kill off airborne bacteria or anything like that. Yeah, it's an interesting question. I don't know that I've heard of any other. Is there
any
something
other
you've heard
myths?
about kombucha?
Not really. I mean, I don't really come across too many people here talking about kombucha, so I
Okay.
haven't really come across too many myths about that. So let's talk about what's next for Tonica. I know you said you're expanding, you're going beyond kombucha beverages. Anything else that you'd like to share with us?
Well, I think the main thing is just that we will, in the same way that I started the company and didn't know exactly the direction, but it's formed over the years. Same thing is happening now. I have a whole incredible team that's now part of the growth projects, and together we are designing what is next for Tonica. So that's about all I can say, but stay tuned, because we're going to continue to make really lovely, authentic products. And I think all of our Canadian customers will be very happy. We're also working on some other distribution. I have some great partners that we're right now working on launching into a whole different
Okay.
country, not the US.
Okay.
But there are a lot of things in the pipeline at the moment.
That's wonderful to hear, Zoe. Thanks so much for this chat, and we will stay tuned. Have a good day.
Thank you, Nietzsche. You too.
Thank you. This has been Food in Canada, the podcast. Visit foodincanada.com for more episodes.